Racist security guard pushes black shopper, then learns she's a state senator. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The morning sun streamed through the curtains of Natalie Harper's modest home as she prepared for what she hoped would be a peaceful day off. As a state senator, her days were typically packed with meetings, hearings, and community events. But today, she had cleared her schedule to enjoy a rare moment of normalcy. Standing in front of the mirror, Natalie smiled at her reflection. She had chosen a simple outfit: jeans, a plain blouse, and sneakers. It wasn't often that she could go out without being recognized, and she relished the chance to blend in. Her position as a state senator often put her in the public eye, but today, she wanted nothing more than to be an ordinary shopper. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from her assistant, reminding her about an upcoming meeting with a civil rights organization. Natalie typed a quick response, assuring them she hadn't forgotten, before slipping the phone into her bag. As she grabbed her keys and headed out the door, Natalie couldn't shake the excitement of having a day to herself. She had decided to visit a high-end department store in the city, a place she rarely had time to browse. It was her little treat for the week, and she looked forward to the quiet joy of shopping alone. Across town, Ben Watkins was starting his shift as a security guard at the department store. Tall and broad-shouldered, Ben took his job seriously, perhaps too seriously. He prided himself on keeping the store safe, though his definition of safety often bordered on excessive scrutiny of certain customers. Ben's co-workers had noticed his tendency to focus on shoppers who didn't fit his idea of the store's typical clientele. "You need to ease up, Ben," one of them had said after he had followed a young man around the electronics section for no apparent reason. "I'm just doing my job," Ben had replied curtly. "If people don't want to be watched, they shouldn't look so suspicious." Today, Ben was stationed near the entrance, scanning each person who walked through the doors. His eyes lingered on Natalie as she entered, taking in her casual attire and the confidence with which she moved. Something about her didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't put his finger on why. Natalie wandered through the store, admiring the displays and occasionally picking up items to examine them more closely. She felt a sense of calm as she browsed, enjoying the freedom of being just another face in the crowd. For once, she wasn't Senator Harper. She was simply Natalie, a woman enjoying a day of retail therapy. As she moved to the jewelry section, she noticed Ben watching her from across the store. His gaze was intense, almost scrutinizing, and it made her feel uneasy. She brushed off the discomfort, reminding herself that he was probably just doing his job. But as she continued browsing, Ben's presence became impossible to ignore. Every time she turned a corner, he was there, his arms crossed and his expression stern. It was as though he was waiting for her to do something wrong. Natalie's heart sank. She had experienced this kind of treatment before, being followed, judged, and dismissed because of the color of her skin. But she hadn't expected it here, in a place where she had come to unwind. Natalie tried to focus on her shopping, but Ben's constant presence loomed like a shadow. She moved to the accessories section, picking up a scarf and examining its delicate stitching. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ben standing a few feet away, watching her every move. His expression wasn't just neutral, it was suspicious, almost accusatory. Deciding she had had enough, Natalie approached the counter to ask a question about a handbag she was considering purchasing. The sales associate greeted her warmly, but before Natalie could even finish her sentence, Ben stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice sharp. Natalie blinked, confused. No problem," she replied evenly. "I was just asking about this handbag." Ben's eyes narrowed. "I've noticed you've been wandering around for a while now," he said. "Can I see your bag?" The question hung in the air, and the sales associate froze, her smile fading. A few other shoppers turned their heads, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding scene. Natalie felt her stomach drop. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Why would you need to see my bag?" "It's just a routine check," Ben replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. We've had issues with theft recently, and I want to make sure everything's in order. Natalie's heart pounded. She had experienced discrimination before, but the public nature of this confrontation made it all the more humiliating. She glanced around, noticing the murmurs and stares from nearby shoppers. "I haven't stolen anything," she said, her voice steady. "And I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do." Ben crossed his arms, his posture rigid. "If you've got nothing to hide, then you won't mind showing me your bag." The tension in the air was palpable. Natalie knew she could easily end the confrontation by revealing her identity, but something stopped her. She didn't want to use her position as a state senator to demand respect. She wanted to be treated fairly, like any other customer. "I'm not going to let you search my bag," she said firmly. "I know my rights." Ben's jaw tightened. "Look, lady, I'm just doing my job. If you don't cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave." Natalie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, a voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" The store manager, a middle-aged man with a clipboard in hand, approached the scene. His eyes darted between Natalie and Ben, taking in the tension between them. "This customer has been acting suspiciously," Ben said quickly. "I was just asking to check her bag." The manager's brow furrowed as he turned to Natalie. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Natalie took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Yes, there's a problem," she said. "I've been followed around the store and accused of theft for no reason. I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't appreciate being treated this way." The manager's eyes widened, clearly taken aback. He looked at Ben, his expression shifting to one of disapproval. "Is that true?" he asked. "She's been acting suspicious," Ben insisted, his voice defensive. "I was just following protocol." Before the manager could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "I saw everything," a woman said, stepping forward. She was holding her phone, and the screen was recording. "This man has been harassing her since she walked in. She didn't do anything suspicious. She's just shopping." The woman's words seemed to galvanize the other shoppers. A man chimed in, "Yeah, I saw it too. He was following her around like a hawk." "It's not right." Ben's face turned red as the murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. The manager looked flustered, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "I'm so sorry for this, ma'am," he said, turning to Natalie. "We'll handle this internally. You're welcome to continue shopping." Natalie shook her head. "I think I've had enough for today," she said, her voice steady but cold. "And for the record, this isn't just about me. This is about how you train your staff to treat customers. You might want to think about that." With that, she turned and walked out of the store, her heart pounding. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, but she kept her head high, refusing to let the humiliation show. By the time Natalie got home, her phone was buzzing with notifications. The video taken by the woman in the store had been uploaded to social media and was quickly gaining traction. Comments poured in, expressing outrage at how Natalie had been treated. "This is disgusting. She was just trying to shop." One comment read. "Racial profiling at its finest," another said. "That guard should be fired." Natalie stared at her phone, torn between frustration and a deep sadness. She hadn't wanted this to become a public spectacle, but she knew the video was shedding light on an issue that went far beyond her own experience. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her assistant. "Senator Harper, are you okay?" the assistant asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Natalie replied, though her voice was weary. "It's been a long day. The video is everywhere," the assistant said. "People are outraged, and the media is starting to pick up the story. Do you want to make a statement?" Natalie hesitated. She had always been careful about how she handled public controversies, knowing that her actions could have far-reaching consequences. But this time, she felt a responsibility to speak up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had experienced the same kind of discrimination. "Yes," she said finally, "let's prepare a statement. But I want it to be about more than just what happened to me. I want to address the bigger picture." By the following morning, the video of Natalie's confrontation with the security guard had gone viral. Major news outlets picked it up, and hashtags like #ShoppingWhileBlack and #JusticeForNatalie began trending on social media. People from all over the country expressed their outrage, sharing their own stories of discrimination and profiling. Natalie sat at her dining table, scrolling through the flood of messages on her phone. Some were supportive, praising her for standing her ground, while others were filled with anger toward the store and the security guard. "You're handling this really well," Emily, her assistant, said as she set down a cup of coffee in front of Natalie. "Most people would be furious." Natalie shook her head. "I am furious," she said quietly, "but being angry won't change anything. What matters is what we do with this moment. This is bigger than me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Emily nodded, admiration shining in her eyes. "What's the plan?" "We need to focus on the systemic issues," Natalie said. "This isn't just about one security guard or one store. It's about the biases that are ingrained in so many parts of our society. I want to push for better training, stricter policies, and real accountability." Later that day, Natalie held a press conference outside her office. A crowd of reporters gathered, their cameras and microphones aimed at her as she stepped up to the podium. She wore a simple black blazer and her signature calm demeanor, but her voice carried the weight of conviction. "Good afternoon," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "As many of you know, a video of an incident involving myself and a security guard at a local department store has been widely shared. While I appreciate the support I've received, I want to make it clear that this is not just about me. This is about addressing a much larger problem." She paused, letting her words sink in. Racial profiling and discrimination are not new. They are issues that countless individuals face every day, often with no one to speak up for them. What happened to me is just one example of a systemic problem that requires immediate attention. Natalie went on to outline her plans for new legislation that would require mandatory anti-discrimination training for security personnel and retail employees. She also called for the creation of an independent oversight body to investigate claims of bias and misconduct in workplaces. "We cannot allow incidents like this to continue," she said, her voice firm. "It's time for real change." The crowd erupted into applause, and reporters shouted questions as Natalie stepped away from the podium. Though she didn't answer any questions directly, her statement had made her intentions clear. Meanwhile, the store where the incident had occurred found itself in the middle of a PR nightmare. Customers began boycotting the business, and social media was flooded with negative reviews and demands for accountability. The store's management issued a public apology, promising to investigate the incident and take appropriate action. Ben, the security guard at the center of the controversy, was placed on suspension pending the outcome of the investigation. But rather than show remorse, he doubled down on his actions. "I was just doing my job," he told a local news station in an interview. "If someone's acting suspicious, it's my responsibility to check it out. This has been blown way out of proportion." His comments only added fuel to the fire, sparking even more backlash online. People called for him to be fired, with some demanding that he face legal consequences for his actions. At home, Natalie watched Ben's interview on TV, her expression a mix of disappointment and frustration. "He doesn't get it," she said to Emily, who was sitting beside her. "He still thinks he did nothing wrong." Emily sighed. "Some people will never change," she said. "But maybe this is an opportunity to show him, and others like him, that they're wrong." Natalie nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She didn't want to let this moment pass without making a lasting impact. But she also knew that real change required more than just public outrage. It required understanding and education. A few days later, Natalie received a call from the store's manager, who sounded both nervous and apologetic. "Senator Harper, I want to personally apologize for what happened," he said. "We've launched a full investigation, and we're committed to making changes to ensure this never happens again." "I appreciate that," Natalie replied, "but an apology isn't enough. What steps are you taking to address the underlying issues?" "We're implementing mandatory bias training for all employees," the manager said, "and we're reviewing our policies to make sure they're in line with best practices." We'd also like to invite you to meet with our leadership team to discuss additional measures we can take. Natalie considered the offer. While she was skeptical of the store's motives, she saw an opportunity to push for meaningful change. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "but only if this isn't just about damage control. I want real accountability." As the days went by, Natalie continued to advocate for systemic reforms. She met with community leaders, held town hall meetings, and worked with her colleagues to draft legislation aimed at addressing racial bias in public spaces. Her efforts were met with overwhelming support, but not everyone was on board. Some critics accused her of using the incident for political gain, while others dismissed her concerns as overblown. "I'm not doing this for myself," Natalie said during one interview. "I'm doing this for everyone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. This is about creating a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Meanwhile, Ben's suspension turned into termination as the store concluded its investigation. The management released a statement acknowledging that his actions were inappropriate and promising to do better moving forward. But for Ben, the damage had already been done. He struggled to find another job, as the incident had tarnished his reputation. At first, he was defiant, blaming Natalie and the media for ruining his life. But as time went on, he began to reflect on his actions and the choices that had led to his downfall. One evening, Ben reached out to Natalie through her office, requesting a meeting. It was a move that surprised everyone, including Natalie herself. After some deliberation, she agreed to meet with him, hoping that the conversation could lead to a better understanding. The meeting between Natalie and Ben was set to take place at a neutral location, a small community center in the city. Natalie arrived early, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before stepping inside. She wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation, but she hoped it would be an opportunity to foster understanding, even if only a little. Ben arrived shortly after, his demeanor subdued. Gone was the self-assured security guard who had confronted her in the store. In his place was a man who seemed weighed down by regret and uncertainty. He hesitated at the door before finally stepping inside. "Senator Harper," he said, his voice quiet but respectful. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Natalie nodded, gesturing for him to sit across from her at a small table. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted, "but I believe in second chances, and in having conversations that matter." Ben lowered his gaze, fidgeting with his hands. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for what I did to you, but for the way I've treated people in general. I didn't realize how much harm I was causing." "What made you realize it?" Natalie asked, her tone neutral but curious. Ben hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. "Losing my job, for one," he said. "But more than that, I've been thinking a lot about what you said during your press conference about the bigger picture. I always thought I was just doing my job, but now I see that I was letting my own biases cloud my judgment." Natalie listened carefully, noting the sincerity in his voice. "Biases are something we all have," she said. "The important thing is recognizing them and working to overcome them. What you did to me was hurtful and humiliating, but I believe people can change if they're willing to learn." Ben looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. "I want to do better," he said. "I don't want to be the person who makes others feel small or unwelcome, but I don't know where to start." "You've already taken the first step by acknowledging your mistakes," Natalie said. "The next step is educating yourself, listening to the experiences of others and challenging your own assumptions. It's not easy, but it's worth it." The conversation lasted over an hour, covering topics ranging from personal accountability to systemic racism. Natalie shared her own experiences of facing discrimination, while Ben opened up about his upbringing and the influences that had shaped his worldview. By the end of the meeting, there was a sense of mutual understanding, even if the road ahead remained uncertain. Ben stood to leave, his expression somber but determined. "Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize," he said, "and for not giving up on people like me." Natalie offered a small smile. "It's not about giving up," she said. "It's about pushing forward and making sure we all do better." The meeting with Ben marked a turning point, not just for him but for Natalie as well. It reinforced her belief that change was possible, even in the face of deeply ingrained biases. She continued her advocacy work with renewed vigor, using her platform to push for policies that would promote equality and accountability. Her efforts began to yield tangible results. The legislation she had proposed gained bipartisan support, and several major retailers announced plans to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for their employees. Community organizations also stepped up, hosting workshops and events aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding. The store where the incident had occurred underwent a complete overhaul of its policies and practices. The management partnered with local advocacy groups to develop training programs and create a more inclusive environment. They also made a public commitment to hiring a more diverse staff, ensuring that their workforce better reflected the community they served. Natalie's actions inspired similar changes in other industries, sparking a broader conversation about bias and discrimination in everyday life. People from all walks of life reached out to her, sharing their stories and expressing their gratitude for her leadership. "I didn't expect one incident to have such a ripple effect," Natalie admitted during a radio interview. "But it shows that when we stand up for what's right, we can create real change. Not just for ourselves, but for others as well." As for Ben, he took Natalie's advice to heart. He enrolled in workshops on racial bias and cultural sensitivity, determined to educate himself and confront his own prejudices. It wasn't an easy journey, but he was committed to becoming a better person. Months later, Ben reached out to Natalie again, this time with an update on his progress. He had started volunteering at a local community center, working with underprivileged youth and helping them build confidence and skills. "I'm not the same person I was," he wrote in an email, "and I have you to thank for helping me see that I needed to change. I still have a long way to go, but I'm trying." Natalie read the email with a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about absolution, it was about growth and the hope that even those who had caused harm could choose to do better. The story of Natalie and Ben became a symbol of redemption and the power of dialogue. It showed that while accountability was essential, so too was the willingness to listen, learn, and change. The incident, painful as it had been, sparked a movement that extended far beyond the walls of a single department store. Natalie continued her work as a state senator, championing causes that promoted justice and equality. But she also made time to connect with the people whose lives she had touched, ensuring that her efforts remained grounded in the realities of those she served. One day, Natalie returned to the store where it all began. This time, she was greeted warmly by the staff, who thanked her for inspiring them to do better. The atmosphere felt different, more welcoming, more inclusive, and Natalie couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. As she browsed the aisles, she noticed a familiar face. It was Ben, now working as a volunteer liaison for the store's community outreach program. He spotted her and approached, a shy but genuine smile on his face. "Senator Harper," he said, "it's good to see you again." Natalie nodded, her smile matching his. "It's good to see you too, Ben. How are things going?" "Better," he said. "Thanks to you." The story of Natalie and Ben's encounter continued to ripple outward, sparking conversations far beyond their community. News outlets followed up with updates, and the public began to see the incident not just as a moment of conflict, but as a turning point for addressing racial bias in everyday life. Natalie was invited to speak at universities, panels, and town halls across the state. People wanted to hear her perspective, not just as a state senator, but as someone who had experienced discrimination firsthand and used that experience to drive change. At one event, a young college student stood up during the Q&A session. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Senator Harper, your story inspired me," she said. "I've dealt with similar situations, but I never knew how to speak up. How did you find the strength to confront what happened to you?" Natalie smiled gently, her tone warm but firm. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but I've learned that staying silent allows the problem to continue. Speaking up is scary, but it's necessary, and you don't have to do it alone. Lean on your community, your friends, your allies. Together, we're stronger." The audience erupted into applause, and the student wiped away tears as she sat down. It was moments like these that reminded Natalie why she had chosen public service in the first place. Meanwhile, Ben's transformation was slowly but surely becoming a reality. His work at the community center exposed him to a wide range of perspectives and taught him the value of empathy. He began building relationships with people whose experiences were vastly different from his own, and those connections helped him see the world in a new light. One day, during a mentorship session with a group of teenagers, Ben shared his story for the first time. He described how his actions had hurt someone and how he had been forced to confront his own biases. "I thought I was doing my job," he told the group, "but the truth is, I was letting my assumptions get in the way. I've learned that we all have blind spots, and it's our responsibility to recognize them and do better." The teenagers listened intently, some nodding in agreement. Afterward, one of them approached Ben and said, "Thanks for being honest with us. It's cool to see someone admit they were wrong and try to fix it." Ben felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't easy to face his past, but if sharing his story could help even one person, it was worth it. Natalie and Ben's paths crossed again at a community event hosted by the store where the incident had occurred. The event was part of the store's new outreach program, which aimed to build bridges with the local community and promote inclusivity. Natalie was invited as a guest speaker, and Ben was there as one of the program's coordinators. When Natalie arrived, she was greeted warmly by the store's staff, who thanked her for inspiring the changes they had implemented. As she made her way to the stage, she spotted Ben helping set up a booth. He caught her eye and gave her a small wave, his expression one of quiet gratitude. Natalie nodded in return, a sense of mutual respect passing between them. During her speech, Natalie spoke about the importance of accountability and the power of redemption. She highlighted the progress the store had made and the efforts of individuals like Ben who were working to create a more inclusive environment. "This event is a testament to what can happen when we confront our biases and commit to doing better," she said. "It's not about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility and striving for progress." The audience applauded, and Natalie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the kind of change she had always dreamed of achieving, not just through legislation, but through meaningful connections and collective action. After the event, Natalie and Ben had a chance to talk. They sat at a table in the corner of the room, away from the bustle of the crowd. Ben seemed nervous, but Natalie's calm demeanor put him at ease. "I just wanted to thank you again," Ben said, "not just for giving me a second chance, but for pushing me to be better. I don't know where I'd be if it weren't for you." "You're the one who made the choice to change," Natalie replied. "All I did was open the door. You walked through it." Ben nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said during our first meeting," he said, "about listening and learning. It's not easy, but I'm starting to understand what you meant." "That's all I could ask for," Natalie said. "Change takes time, but every step forward matters." As the evening wound down, Natalie reflected on how far they had come since that fateful day in the store. What had started as an act of discrimination had turned into an opportunity for growth and understanding. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there was always the potential for progress. Natalie's phone buzzed with a message from Emily, who had stayed behind at the office to handle some last-minute work. Saw the event photos online, the message read, "You're making a difference." As always, Natalie smiled, her heart full. She knew there was still much work to be done, but for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment. It wasn't just about the changes she had inspired, it was about the connections she had made along the way. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Natalie's actions continued to grow. Her advocacy for systemic reforms gained traction, and her proposed legislation was officially introduced in the state legislature. The bill aimed to mandate anti-discrimination training for all retail and security staff across the state, create an independent oversight body to investigate claims of bias, and establish funding for community-based programs to combat prejudice. The bill was met with widespread support from both the public and her colleagues. During a televised legislative session, Natalie stood before the assembly to deliver a speech that would solidify her legacy as a champion of equality. "This bill is not just about one incident or one person," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of their background or the color of their skin." Discrimination is not just an individual problem. It's a systemic one, and it's time we address it head-on. Her words resonated deeply, and when the vote was called, the bill passed with an overwhelming majority. Natalie felt a wave of relief and pride as she stood among her colleagues, knowing that her efforts had led to meaningful change. Meanwhile, Ben continued his journey of self-improvement. He became a regular volunteer at the community center, where he worked closely with underprivileged youth. His story of redemption and growth inspired many, and he began to find a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life. One afternoon, Ben was approached by a young boy named Jamal, who had been attending the center for several months. Jamal was shy but curious, and he often lingered near Ben during activities. "Mr. Ben," Jamal said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Ben replied, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "What's on your mind? Why do you help people like me?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to." Ben felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought back to his own mistakes and the pain he had caused, and he realized how far he had come. "Because I want to make up for the times I didn't do the right thing," he said honestly. "And because everyone deserves a chance to feel valued." Jamal nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I think that's really cool," he said. "I want to be like you when I grow up." Ben's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was making a real difference. As part of her ongoing efforts, Natalie organized a statewide forum on racial bias and inclusion. The event brought together lawmakers, community leaders, educators, and business owners to discuss strategies for creating a more equitable society. Ben was invited to share his story as part of a panel on personal accountability and growth. When it was his turn to speak, Ben took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, their eyes fixed on him as he began to tell his story. "I'm not proud of the person I used to be," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I let my biases control my actions, and I hurt people because of it. But I've learned that change is possible, if you're willing to do the work." He went on to talk about his journey, from losing his job to finding a new sense of purpose through education and community service. He spoke about the importance of listening, learning, and taking responsibility for one's actions. "I'm not perfect, and I never will be," he said, "but I'm committed to doing better every single day. And if my story can help even one person see the world differently, then it's worth it." The audience erupted into applause, and Ben felt a sense of catharsis wash over him. For the first time, he truly believed in the possibility of redemption. After the forum, Natalie and Ben had a chance to talk. They stood together in a quiet corner of the venue, reflecting on how far they had come since their initial confrontation. "You did a great job up there," Natalie said, her tone warm. "Your story is powerful, and it's going to inspire a lot of people." Ben smiled, his gratitude evident. "Thank you for giving me the chance to tell it," he said. "And thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." "It's not about deserving," Natalie replied. "It's about believing that people can change, and giving them the opportunity to do so." Ben nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've learned a lot from you," he said, "and I hope I can keep paying it forward." The final chapter of their story was written not in grand gestures, but in the small, meaningful ways they continued to make a difference. Natalie's legislation was signed into law, setting a new standard for accountability and inclusion across the state. Ben became a full-time mentor at the community center, dedicating his life to helping others overcome the challenges he had once faced. Their paths continued to cross from time to time, each encounter a reminder of how much they had both grown. And while the incident that brought them together was painful, it had ultimately led to a shared commitment to building a better world. One sunny afternoon, Natalie returned to the store where it all began. She was there for a community event, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. The staff greeted her warmly, and the store's new policies were evident in the diverse, welcoming environment. As she browsed the aisles, she thought back to the day when everything had gone wrong, and how that moment had sparked a chain of events that changed so many lives. It was a bittersweet memory, but one she wouldn't trade for anything. As she left the store, she spotted Ben across the street, helping a group of kids set up a lemonade stand. He caught her eye and waved. His face lit up with a genuine smile. Natalie waved back, her heart full. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was proof that even in the face of adversity, progress was possible. And that, she thought, was something worth fighting for.